In his book titled The Bronx in Bits and Pieces, author Bill Twomey gives a description of a small island off the coast of City Island, New York. He writes that in 1775, British cartographers cataloging the area now known as New York came across a small island just 1 mile long. They named it Hart Island due to its heart-like shape. Later maps would refer to this location as Hart Island due to a clerical spelling error, and soon it was determined to be a New York State territory. As of the year 2020, this island has been the home of a carnival, a baseball field, a military silo, and is the final resting place of over 1 million unnamed bodies. This is the story of the Island of the Forgotten. Hart Island is what is known as a potter's field. Unnamed bodies that the state must bury are taken to a specified location for disposal. Many states have them, but New York is unique in having dedicated one lone spot for all its unnamed inhabitants. The first people buried here were Union soldiers who had fallen during the Civil War in 1868. Public burials for the poor and unclaimed began shortly after. In City Cemetery, Hart Island was born. Burials were so common that in less than 90 years, over 500,000 bodies were buried in City Cemetery. The island was run under the New York Parks Department, having taken charge of the moving of existing potter's fields in both modern-day Manhattan Park and the New York Public Library. Those bodies were moved to Hart Island during the 19th century, and the Parks Department remained in charge of the island until the mid-20th century. Hart Island's status as a potter's field didn't mean it was closed for business. In 1885, less than 1,000 feet away from the mass grave, a woman's sanitarium was founded, as well as a tubercularium. Later investigations into the conditions of these facilities would lead to their closure, as it was deemed too unsafe for people to continue inhabiting them. Bodies from these buildings were of course delivered to the nearby potter's field. In 1892, these buildings were expanded in size after it was found that New York's asylum populations were overcrowded. You can guess where most of these people ended up. Boys' and men's workhouses were also founded in the late 19th century, being expansions of the existing prisons on nearby Blackwell Island. By the 20th century, over 2,000 prisoners were held on Hart Island. Throughout the island's history, multiple workhouses and prison extensions were added, but burials never ceased. It became a tradition on the island for prisoners to bury the dead every day. Orders were placed for the construction of addiction recovery houses and homeless shelters on the island as well. Everything New York wanted to forget could be found on Hart Island. During World War II, the prison's populations were moved in their entirety to nearby Rikers Island, so that the workhouses could be used as disciplinary barracks. This swiftly led to overcrowding on Rikers Island. The Department of Corrections took charge of the mass burials in City Cemetery, turning the overflowing Rikers prison into a new labor force dedicated to burials of unclaimed bodies. Until very recently, prisoners of Rikers were tasked with burials on Hart Island. Once World War II was over, a prison was reopened on Hart Island, as well as a new homeless and alcoholic shelter, which replaced a previous shelter that was closed due to health and safety concerns.
It really doesn't look like it was ever a prison. Well, when they renovated, they never had bars on the windows. They had heavy expanded metal. Because most of the men are up here only doing 6 months to a year at the most. So they liked it up here. It was a good jail. You had to be in jail. To be locked up, this was a good place to be. This is the best place to be.
In 1956, in response to the start of the Cold War, multiple missile silos operated by the nearby Fort Slocum were placed on the island. This missile silo would not be fully decommissioned until 1974. This meant it was in use on the island while it was still the site of a mass grave, a prison, and an alcoholic recovery shelter. A new drug rehabilitation center known as Phoenix House was proposed and built on the island in 1967 and was housed in the remains of the Women's Sanitarium. For about 10 years, they hosted festivals, baseball games, and even a newspaper known as the Heart Beat, along with occupational therapy for patients, which included the cobbling of leather shoes, which can still be found littering the grounds to this day. However, regular ferry travel was closed in 1977, and the Phoenix House was moved to Lower Manhattan. Slowly over the course of the next 20 years, every building on Hart Island was abandoned, and the cemetery was expanded by more than 50 acres, until the majority of the remaining area was in use for the mass burials. Multiple efforts have been made to re-inhabit the island, but all have failed due to the opposition from New York residents, as well as a lack of funding. 1985 would be the year that sealed the island's fate.
It's a disease first detected in the gay community that has now spread beyond that. A disease experts are now calling a national epidemic.
16 bodies of patients which had died from AIDS were buried on the island, with the city citing an overabundance of caution. A citation by the New York City Council Data team reads, "The New York Times points out, the island would go on to receive scores, if not hundreds, of people who had died during the AIDS epidemic, which during the 1980s and 90s killed more than 100,000 people in New York, about a quarter of AIDS deaths nationwide during the same period. Thus, Hart Island may be the largest cemetery for victims of the AIDS epidemic. The first pediatric AIDS victim to die in New York City is buried in the only single grave on Hart Island, with a concrete marker that reads SCB1, or Special Child Baby 1. The precise number of AIDS victims buried on the island is unknown, but it is estimated to be in the thousands. Hart Island continues to be used as an isolation ground for disease victims, with hundreds of unnamed COVID-19 fatalities in 2020 being entombed under the typical 3 feet of dirt. Over 1 million unnamed bodies were buried on Hart Island as of the 21st century. According to the Hart Island Project, a fire set by vandals in 1977 destroyed many records up to that point, including physical descriptions of those buried. The nonprofit organization seeks to restore this documentation and identify as many people who have been buried on the island as possible. So far, the Hart Island Project has been able to identify over 66,000 individuals, and this number continues to grow as more information can be uncovered. In 2018, erosion along the shoreline of Hart Island exposed multiple remains of now skeletal corpses.
Years of storms are eroding the island shores, unearthing graves.
Entire skeletons are sort of falling out of the hill onto the beach, and then they're washed away with the tide.
Once identified, the remains will be reburied by Rikers Island prisoners.
Why in the world would an agency that's managing our jails have anything to do with this island? And it's simply wrong that people who were neglected in life, who were marginalized in life in the city, are now getting the same treatment in this burial ground.
As of 2019, control over the island was handed back over to the New York Parks Department, with the New York City Department of Transportation taking control of ferry transits to and from the island. Unclaimed bodies continued to be buried on Hart Island, adding to a growing number of homeless, disease victims, alcoholics, prisoners, asylum patients, and others, whom New York City has tried desperately to forget.
The white men walk the white halls, where the women came with their mind undone. All the ships have passed, and the sailors wave hello. Is there a way to shoot an arrow straight into the sun? Shine a light for all the forgotten ones. Shine a light.